So I finally read Dan Slott's She-Hulk, and now I am pissed off at the show all over again. I know, I'm extremely late to this, and a fake She-Hulk fan. I've been busy reading all these other She-Hulk comics, so I hadn't even got to one of the most celebrated runs of the character, which of course is Dan Slott's 2004 She-Hulk, which is also one of the main inspirations for the show. You can tell because this guy in one episode is named Dan, and he works for Slott Trucks or something. But also the main setup is the same. Jen gets a new job at GLK&H, working at their superhuman law department. We meet various characters from this run in the show, like H of GLK&H, Holloway, rival girl boss lawyer Mallory Book, friendly himbo pug. Two of the better side characters in the show, and they are from here. But then the similarities from this run in the show kind of start to evaporate, because as I talked about in a previous video, despite the show being called Attorney at Law, it had no real interest in being about lawyers. Which is too bad, because obviously, a lawyer working in a superhuman law division in the Marvel Universe, a world full of androids, aliens, and wizards, is a fucking interesting concept, and they fucking fumble it. Even though the blueprint is right here. Now, you might not be able to do like every single scene beat for beat from this comic, but you could like do a lot of it, because like I said, a superhuman law division is a really fun premise, and this comic runs with it. Like, there's an issue where a ghost gets called in to be a witness to his own murder trial. So this sparks a whole debate about whether a ghost can legally testify. Since he's no longer alive, does he still have any rights? She-Hulk ends up arguing that people come back from the dead all the time in the Marvel Universe, so he very well could be a person that will one day again be alive, and therefore has all the same rights as any other living person. She ends up citing the time that Thanos killed half the universe, and then people ended up coming back, you know, from Infinity Gauntlet, which is a thing that happened in the MCU, so you could literally do this sequence. And she's just like, hey, everyone in the courtroom, raise your hand if you got killed by Thanos and then came back later. And like half the people raise their hand. And she's like, see? It literally happens all the time. You could literally just do this sequence in the show, because that's a thing that happened in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's a time travel story where this guy shoots someone because he believes that person will kill him in the future, and so he's like, no, it's not murder, it's self-defense. And so then like the TVA gets involved. It gets like really convoluted with some of the time travel stuff. The long boxes. Okay, so this arc establishes this thing where Marvel Comics exists within the Marvel Universe, and they publish comics that are near one-to-one identical issues to the comics that exist in our world. And the Superhuman Law Division has a whole basement full of long boxes of comic books that are based on the real events that happen in universe. And because of the Comics Code Authority, a government organization, these comics are treated as legal documents that are usable in the court of law. So this becomes like a thing throughout the whole run, where there'll be moments where their characters are like going through old Marvel comics in order to like find evidence that supports whatever case they're currently working on. It's weird and meta, and I love it. You could definitely do something like this in the MCU. You could literally have Marvel Comics be a thing in the MCU. I think that would be fun. But you could go even weirder with it too, if you wanted to go more fourth wall stuff. You could have like there be a DVD box set of the Phase 1 Marvel movies or something that she has to use in the case. There's just like so much stuff you could do. And that's on top of like, you know, actual good character development. There's this whole arc with Holloway, one of the main partners of the firm, who is in the show. We find out that he has a granddaughter who's like a supervillain. She's like this teenage delinquent who ended up joining a supervillain gang, is doing crime and stuff. And he's trying to like gain legal custody of her, because I think her parents are dead or whatever. So She-Hulk gets involved in that case. This character, Southpaw, becomes like a fun foil for She-Hulk and many different misadventures. But it also brings this level of depth to Holloway, a character who seemed kind of one note when we first met him. And then in the show, he's just one note the whole time. He never gets any development or any depth, We never find out like more if he has more motivation to what he's doing or why he recruited Jen in the first place, apart from like PR stuff. There's just like so much things you could do with these characters that they don't do in the show, but are done in the fucking source material that the show is based on. Same with Titania, a very fun recurring She-Hulk villain. There's a whole issue in here that expands on her backstory and gives her like depth and nuance. There's tons of great jokes throughout this comic. There's this one really great issue with Spider-Man where She-Hulk convinces him to sue J. Jonah Jameson for libel.
Slander is spoken. In print, it's libel.
The real reason Jonah hates me is because I'm black. And yes, obviously you might not be able to do every single thing from this run. Like there's a whole arc where she becomes a space lawyer that, you know, might not fit in the budget of the show or whatever. But there's so much in here that they could do, and there's so much in the Marvel Universe that they could play with that they just don't, and that's frustrating. Like, what are the actual legal ramifications for the snap, the blip? The time that half the universe died for 5 years. If you were married and then your wife got snapped and then like after the correct amount of grieving you met someone new and maybe got remarried and then your old wife shows up again, just like alive again, who are you married to? Are you married to both? Do you divorce one of them? How do you sort that out legally? That could be a whole episode. They kind of play with the idea of like the borders being a little less stable during the snap in Falcon and Winter Soldier, and then they kind of forget about that idea moving forward. But like there's questions, there are interesting stories to be told there. Like that's a fucking interesting concept that half the people died for 5 years and then they just came back and now you have to adapt to that world. Like what does that look like? That's interesting. There's a whole fucking society of Asgardians living in Norway somewhere. How does that work legally? They're refugees, but do they have like legal nation status? How does that work with like the people that already live in that country? Maybe they're at a different part of it and it's fine, but like how does that work legally? That could be a whole episode. The Wakandans, you have the Wakandan nation. They're always doing wacky shit. They have trouble with the American government constantly in those movies. Like, make an episode about them. You don't necessarily need one of the main ones to show up, but there's plenty of Wakandans that could appear in the She-Hulk show for an episode. Why not? There's probably a really interesting episode about Cap's shield. Who does that shield belong to? It's made of vibranium, which we know comes from Wakanda. There's probably a strong legal case to be made that it belongs to them. There are plenty of ideas to pull from, and tons of stuff from this arc that the show pretends it's adapting you could just do. Who would have thought that the concept of a superhuman law division in a superhero universe would be like an interesting concept with fun ideas? You wouldn't even know from watching the show, but this is in fact an interesting premise, and all the writers of the show had to do was read the damn comic. But I don't know if this is even news, because like we've known from a while now the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not really based on the comics. Like they'll take ideas from certain storylines here and there, but obviously it's doing its own thing. But like, isn't that weird? Like, isn't that weird that they don't really follow the comics? Like, I'm not saying you have to follow them one-to-one, but when you have, like, stuff to work with, you might as well use that as a base, right? Like, is that a crazy idea to base, especially when, like, the show is clearly, like, taking specific names of characters from this run and using them, and, like, using the basic setup and premise of this run, but then it doesn't like take any of the actual story ideas from it. It's strange. Like, why? Why is that the case? Like, the Supergirl movie is coming out soon, and a lot of the marketing is like, oh, this is the first time ever that DC has made a movie based on a comic. And, you know, ignoring Watchmen and V for Vendetta and the dozens of straight-to-DVD animated movies that are directly based on comics. Sure, then that is true if we ignore all those. But also, isn't that weird? Isn't that weird that like there's been like 1 billion comic book movies, superhero movies, and Supergirl from 2026 is the first time that they're like that's like part of the pitch, is that it's directly based on a specific comic run and not just like loosely inspired by the title of one. Like, isn't that weird? Like, there are so many stories. There are so many actual good stories from the comics, and they just don't use them. They barely use them for inspiration, and then like occasionally Marvel will pay lip service to, like, they pretend that the creators have read the comics or that they're involved in the comics, and maybe some of them have. It's like, oh, look, this character is named after Dan Slott, but like that doesn't mean anything when you don't take any of the stories that Dan Slott wrote, which you could use. You just like, hey, reference to guy who worked on the She-Hulk comic. We're not using any of his stuff, even though it's good and we could use it. Fucking wild. It's really frustrating and annoying when they make a show or a movie and it's said to be based on the comics, and there's no reason it can't be, and then they don't base it on the comics. It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? And it'd be fine if the show was also, you know, like, really good. But when it doesn't want to be a lawyer show, and it doesn't want to be based on the comic that it's pretending to be based on, then, like, what are we doing? Like, why? I can't help you if you're not gonna at least try. If you're not gonna at least try to do the things that are interesting about the character and the world she's set in. Anyways, moral is, go read Dan Slott's She-Hulk. It's really good. But how do I do that? Well, here's the other thing. Here's why no one can get into American comics. So this is the She-Hulk by Dan Slott omnibus. It contains every issue of She-Hulk written by Dan Slott from issues number 1 to 12. And this is the She-Hulk Complete Collection, Volume 2, which contains the second half of the Dan Slott She-Hulk run from issues 6 to 21. Wait, what? You see, because Marvel is stupid, there's actually 2 runs of She-Hulk by Dan Slott. She-Hulk 2004, which this collects, and She-Hulk 2005, which this collects issues 6 to 21 of. Are you confused yet? See, She-Hulk ran from issues number 1 to 12 in 2004, and then they rebooted the series a couple months later in 2005, which ran from issues 1 to 21. If you're good at math, you might have noticed that I have 5 issues missing of this run. Because, silly me, I bought the omnibus, which looks like this, instead of the Complete Collection Volume 1, which looks like this. I know. What a stupid mistake of me. Yes, that's right. The omnibus, which omni means all, only collects the first half of this run, which is technically 2 different runs because there was a break, but it's one continuous story written by one author. DC does this as well occasionally, but it seems to be pretty bad with Marvel, where they reboot their issue numbering every couple years or so for some comics, because historically issue 1s sell better, which is like, yeah, because that's, you know, usually the start of a storyline. But sometimes it just isn't, because in the case of She-Hulk by Dan Slott, it's literally the middle point. And like, yeah, you also don't know necessarily how long a run is going to end, because that depends on how well it sells, or how long a run is going to last. But like, people are going to have a hard time following it if, for example, it stops in the middle and then starts again at number 1, and there's no real indication that that's a continuation or and not the same thing again, apart from the years that it came out. So what do I even do about this? How do I find the missing 5 issues? Well, there is individual trades that are like a little bit smaller, usually about half the size of this, that do exist and contain specific 5 or 6 issue arcs. And there is one for the middle part of this story, She-Hulk by Dan Slott from 2005, issues 1 to 5. But like, these trades are not really in print and they're kind of hard to find. Occasionally you can find some at your local comic store, but it's never the ones that you need, of course. The other thing I could do is rebuy the complete collection volume 1, which would cover everything in here plus the 5 issues I'm missing, and then, you know, I have the rest, the second half of the arc from this volume. Or what I should have done is buy this. This is She-Hulk by Dan Slott, the Omnibus hardcover edition, which is actually the complete run. What the fuck? Yes, this is a different, also not necessarily in print and hard to find hardcover collection, which does in fact include She-Hulk from 2004, number 1 to 12, and She-Hulk from 2005, numbers 1 to 21. So this includes both of these, plus the 5 issues I'm missing. Did I spend an embarrassing amount on buying all these She-Hulk comics? Shut up. You're not my lawyer. I plead the fifth, or whatever. For those keeping track, She-Hulk by Dan Slott has been collected in 4 different formats, one of which doesn't even collect the entire run. And to make things more confusing, after Dan Slott left the book, Peter David continued the run from issues 22 to 38, even though that would have actually been a good time to restart the numbering to number 1, and the start of a new story arc and a new creative team. And normally I actually am fine with the numbering continuing, but it's just like very strange when they stopped the numbering in the middle of the run, and then kept it going later when there was an actual natural breaking point. And this is just one run from one writer that's really not that long. It lasted for almost 3 years, and it's this confusing and hard to collect, and it's the basis for a TV show. So you'd think like Marvel would want to capitalize on that and release like a very easy to find complete collection that's like well labeled and actually has the complete collection in it. But no, that's not the case. It's confusing as fuck, and this is literally one story by one guy. Imagine if you were actually like interested in trying to read like the full history of one character. It's a fucking nightmare. And I like this shit. I was raised on comic books. I like this shit. I like collecting different stuff. I like finding rare issues and rare storylines. But when there's something I'm actually interested in reading and it's like a fucking nightmare and I end up spending way more money than I probably should have to just try to read one full storyline. Like, imagine if you're new to comics and you are maybe a fan of the Marvel shows or movies or whatever, and you want to like read about the characters and read the source material. It's fucking impossible to get into it. This is just like one sample, but like all the comics are like this. All characters have really convoluted and complicated histories, and they're constantly rebooting the numbering to number 1. Most of the time it's not like that well collected, or even if it is collected, it's like out of print and hard to find, and there's multiple versions of the same collection, so you can't like, even if you find one thing that collects some of the stuff you are interested in, you might end up with another thing that you think is the same thing, but it's actually a different thing. It's fucking annoying. No wonder there aren't new fans created from any of the big MCU stuff. Actually trying to get into comics is fucking impossible, and the publishers don't make it easy. This is why manga is actually pretty successful in the West, because if you want to read all of Naruto, where do you get into Naruto? Naruto Volume 1. If you want to get into One Piece, where do you start? One Piece Volume 1. If you want to get into She-Hulk, where do you start? I mean, like, this is a decent place to start, but it's hard to find, and you might get the wrong one, and then you won't be able to read more. It's fucking insane. Oh, you should read Dan Slott's She-Hulk. Oh, which Dan Slott She-Hulk? Dan Slott She-Hulk from 2004 or Dan Slott She-Hulk from 2005? Those are both the same story, but it starts in 2004 with She-Hulk issue 1, not to be confused with She-Hulk issue 1. It's so stupid. Anyways, that's this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see more of me ranting about She-Hulk, you should check out my other video I did. Or, you know, subscribe. Or don't subscribe, because it turns out that 100% of my viewers are not subscribed. So it seems like subscribing is the only way to guarantee that you'll never see one of my videos. So if you hated this, please please subscribe. And then YouTube knows not to recommend my videos to you. Bye-bye.